So I'm with my friend Richard. We were trying to do another video, but it turns out to be it. It's great talking to you, Richard. You're an atheist or an agnostic?
Agnostic.
Cool. And we're going to talk about what is more reasonable to believe in, God or no God. Do you want to start off with saying something?
Yeah, well, the basic case, both of atheism, strangely enough, and agnosticism, is that if there is no proof for something, it is reasonable to assume there is not. There's no good reversing the balance of truth and saying, well, there's no proof God doesn't exist, because of course there's no proof that I do not have an invisible pink elephant on my shoulder. Nobody can prove the invisible pink elephant does not exist, but because nobody can prove he does exist, it's reasonable to assume he does not.
Okay, so I don't believe there's a pink elephant that made my phone. I'm quite sure that there was something far more intelligent and more realistic than a pink elephant. In the same way, I can see not only us who are incredibly complex, far more complex than my phone, something intelligent made that. They didn't just fall into place. There's no pink elephant. It's a weird thing to say. That's what atheists tend to say to make fun of the situation. So yeah, I think it's just reasonable, according to normal logic, to believe in a creator, an intelligent creator for us. We didn't just fall into our molecules didn't just fall into place.
Yeah. Well, we must understand where the burden of proof lies. If I choose to come here and make a claim, it's up to me to prove that claim. And if you wish to prove the existence of God, it's up to you to prove the existence of God. So I'm still waiting for evidence.
So I've just demonstrated it through our common sense that there must be a God. So it's the burden of proof, in a way, lies on you to say that there is no creator, because that's it's a really odd thing for atheists to say that there is no creative designer when clearly there is very complex design that couldn't have just happened by itself. So the burden of proof is on you to say that there is no God, because that's an odd thing to claim in the first place.
Okay, you were talking about the complexity of that mobile phone over there. I believe you were probably meaning to talk about the complexity of the human body and use the irreducible complexity argument, which we have discussed before. And actually, since we do know the ways in which simple organisms become complex ones.
Can we just keep, because you're so much taller than me that you keep getting out of shot. Hey, just doing a video. Yeah. All right.
Since we do know the ways in which simple organisms become complex ones, and we have.
And what is that? Could you describe that idea of yours?
Well, it's not an idea of mine. It's evolution. In that whatever works in nature tends to persist. Animals which are easy to catch and very helpless in one way or the other do tend to get eaten, and as a result of that, whatever characteristic caused them to be eaten does not persist. On the other hand, those which are better than the average and more advanced in some way or another do tend to survive, and in that way simple organisms become more complex ones.
Okay, so the idea behind that really is that there are things called random mutations, and basically there's a whole set of creation put out there, and then things are obliterated through death of some sort, and that's the process by which the good stuff remains. That is not a creative mechanism, that's a destructive mechanism, and it's not a very intelligent system, because it could be in some scenarios that for example, somebody, let's say a farmer who's really, I don't want to insult farmers, but let's say there's a farmer who's got a really strong immune system. Okay, and all the intelligent scientists died through cholera, say cholera, some sort of illness due to lack of strong immune system. Is that the best way to decide what survives or it does or does not? That's not a very intelligent system. So to say, first of all, that anything is random In reproduction, that's crazy because there's nothing random in our organisms in the first place. And the idea that this process, this destructive process, is somehow creative is not true either.
Okay, you are assuming by saying something is not.
Oh, can I just want to say one? I do believe in evolution, but not blind evolution, which is random evolution.
Can I deal with your point here?
Yeah.
The basic error, I believe, in your thinking is indicated when you talk about it's not an intelligent system and not basically a very good way of doing things. This does not apply because there is nobody intelligently designing this process. And it's entirely true that scientists who have higher IQs than farmers may well die of the cholera. But this is not a problem because evolution does not have a set direction. It is not that there's some intelligent master of the entire process trying to cause us to evolve into human beings. It is simply a process of whatever works will work, basically. And so very often you will find things which appear to be more advanced to us, such as higher IQ, will not work. And as a result, adaptations which might, to our human minds, appear to be good adaptations may result in higher death rates and they will die out. But that's completely okay because it is not a deliberate process. It's not a design committee deciding who survives and who does not. It is simply who objectively survives and who does not. For instance, one give you an example of this. Early hominids. This is the early Homo sapiens had larger brains than the ones we have at the moment. Nobody's quite sure why they shrunk. Some people speculate it might be because they ate an almost entirely meat diet, but nobody is absolutely certain. And you might think that actually shrinking brains was a reverse adaptation, a reverse evolution. But it appears that for one reason or another, we can't even imagine this worked, and therefore this is what we have now.
Okay, so if we look at the human eye, incredibly complicated. We don't want a process like my friend is describing, which could go in any direction. There's so much complexity, and people don't seem to understand the level of complexity. I'm just going to quickly describe that level of complexity, and I'm going to pick out something that Richard Dawkins discussed in his book, The Blind Watchmaker. The idea that you can have a watch made by blind forces, let's say. Hey, just doing a video, but good seeing you. So just to give you an idea, so he talks about hemoglobin, and hemoglobin, just in case you don't know, is the red stuff that the stuff that makes your blood red. Okay, and people underestimate how complicated these things are. Okay, incredibly specialist systems for carrying oxygen around, and to do the short version, because I've done a video on this already, the probability of something that being made by a set of random processes, even if you try to do it from the beginning of the universe, the chance of that is, simply put, 0. If you wanted to put it as an actual number, 1 divided by 10 to the power 700, okay, so just to put it into perspective for people who are not kind of mathematicians, the chance of you, I did this bit of research on this, the chance of you getting run over in the UK or something is like 1 in a million or something. That's only 1 over 10 to the power 6, right? So 10 to the power 700 is so ridiculously huge that there's no chance that even that tiny thing could be made by accident, and you need 5 million of those hemoglobin things to make a pin drop of blood. So you really need an efficient process, not a process that goes this direction and that direction like you're describing.
Okay, 3 things to say about that. First of all, hemoglobin was not nature's first attempt at transmitting oxygen. There are 2 other chemicals out there. There's a green blood you find in amphibians, which uses copper instead of iron. It's not very efficient, but nevertheless it did evolve before mammalian hemoglobin. So this would tend to indicate that it's not a matter of somebody saying, okay, we're going to have hemoglobin now, let's evolve this thing. It's actually nature finding inferior solutions and then superior ones. The second thing to understand is that hemoglobin is chemically, strangely enough, almost exactly the same as chlorophyll. It just has a few atoms, at least this is what I've read, a few atoms.
I checked this because you said it earlier, but anyway.
Okay.
No, I shouldn't interrupt. Go
No,
on.
that's fine. No, I will check, because it does seem a little bit too good, and it's not really particularly clear to me how, you know, a plant could evolve into a fairly advanced animal like a mammal. So I will check that. But nevertheless, my other point also still works, is that nature has an awful lot of time to come up with these things. You can have an enormous amount of mutations which result in the death of the animal itself. It's still happening at the moment. We have children born with birth defects and so forth. So nature's still trying that trick. But there are so many animals in the world and such a long time for this to take place. The most fabulously improbable events not only can happen, but certainly will happen over time.
So we don't have much time. So I don't think I made my point very clear about the improbability of even hemoglobin being made by accident. So I talked about the probability of it being made by accident is one thing, but even if you had a mutation every millisecond since the beginning of the universe, it was actually really unfair because the conditions were too hostile until we got to Earth anyway. But I'm being generous and saying even if you had every millisecond since the beginning of the universe, right? How many billion years again? 13 point whatever billion years, right? And I calculated this. It's only like 10 to the power 8. So you do 10 to the power, it was actually, the probability of hemoglobin being made by accident was 10 to the power 700 and something. Then you divide it by 10 to the power 8. That means like the chances of it being possible, given mutations happening every millisecond since the beginning of the universe, is still absolutely zero. So that's what I want to get across, because this is I'm glad you pointed this out, right? Because this is a common mistake that I fell for when I was an atheist, that, oh, we got so much time, anything is possible. No, it's far too complicated. It's so impossible that even a drop of blood, never mind a human organ or an eye or whatever being created, is just impossible. You made a couple of points. I mean, I think you took back maybe the chlorophyll thing, but maybe, I don't know, should I talk about that or should I let you...
Okay, well,
should I talk about the chlorophyll thing?
Well, basically, I'm prepared provisionally to accept that's true, because it always has seemed slightly odd to me.
Because chlorophyll itself helps advanced solar panel material, right? And it's like saying you pull out something, shove something in, and then you've got some other advanced material. It's not likely. And also you mentioned there was an earlier form of hemoglobin. In fact, there are many...
Not different chemical altogether. Two. I don't know. I know that one is a sort of green copper-based blood in amphibians. I don't know about the
There's
other one.
all sorts of hemoglobins.
Okay.
Even in mammals, there's loads of specialized kinds of hemoglobin.
The point of that statement is that if we had this sort of managing committee of evolution or whatever, they would not probably have produced these substandard forms of hemoglobin, even if that's what they're called, before going onto the main solution, which sounds far more like an evolutionary progression to me. Now, okay,
I'll just remember that point for later.
other points are that probably your maths, I mean, it's almost certainly produced by somebody who, you know,
Richard Dawkins.
Richard Dawkins. Okay, well, if he
Arch atheist, if you don't know. Sorry to interrupt.
yeah, okay, yeah, that's fine. Please, you know, if that is the case, and it's not some Christian apologist, then he would have brought that up in order to abolish the entire argument. He would not bring it up in order to discredit his own position. So it will be interesting to look into that. One thing I would like to say though is that nobody is claiming that for no apparent reason a whole group of random atoms decided to coalesce into this fairly but not massively complicated compound. What they are saying is that it would have been an adaptation of something previous. Now, I'm sure there are people who are better at speculating on what that compound might be, but the whole irreducible complexity argument
When you
is
say
based on the
irreducible, do you mean is that the same as irreducible as well?
quite
Is that,
possibly.
maybe it's
That-
a different
that's
argument.
I mean, I've heard this from Christian
What does
apologists.
irreducible mean?
Well,
then?
let me tell you.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, it's quite possible since I've actually heard this some Christians here who don't seem to be terribly scientific literate. It's quite possible I've got the term wrong. But it's basically the idea, you look at an eyeball and you say, how could this appear randomly from nothing? Which actually is a straw man argument because nobody is claiming that things like eyeballs evolved randomly from nothing. What they actually did is you have eye spots in worms, which are simply areas in the head which are slightly sensitive to sun, and then later on you have more advanced worms which have little lenses over them, still a bit crap, and then you have focusing mechanisms come in, and finally we end up with the mammalian eye, which is fairly good. But still not perfect because it has this very, very complicated process of turning the image upside down and then right way up again, all the rest of it, which octopi don't have, by the way, which would tend to indicate it's evolved as a result of series of fortuitous accidents. Otherwise, the fundamental design is rather odd and unnecessarily complicated. It's working against itself on several different levels. All of which points to a perfectly credible evolution of the eye and probably every other organ as well.
Yeah, so I should clarify, I don't believe everything was created in one go, and I do believe there were all sorts of stages. That's very much in line with the Quran. The Quran says God is the creator, he creates in stages, so there's no problem. That's for people who don't know, or Muslims who don't know that, because there are some Muslims who think that it all just happened with a flick of a finger, which goes against pretty much all the teachings of Islam. This is just for the Muslims. The word Rabb, which means it's the second version of the Holy Quran. It means the Creator creates in stages. So we don't have a problem with stage by stage development. My only problem is logically, does that stage by stage happen by accident of some sort, right? And so I don't have a problem either with there being, you could call it earlier forms of life, right? Where those designs were perfect for those earlier forms of life, no problem, right? And on top of that, those things are not simple either. Those earlier forms of life are not simple, they're incredibly complex. And then so you just got from one thing to the other. But the idea that it can happen sort of randomly towards a better design is actually unrealistic. We never experience that in life. We never try to randomly create a phone or randomly create anything, and it's against the basic laws of not only common sense but also the second law of thermodynamics, which basically says that if a system is left to itself, you have entropy, which means things naturally fall apart. I remember seeing you a long time ago, yeah? Never mind, don't worry. No, sorry, don't worry, sorry. Confusing people. You had a big hat on one time. That was you. Yeah. Sorry about that. Shouldn't do that in the video. So the second law of thermodynamics says if you leave a system by itself, you have entropy, which means things tend to fall apart, be more disorganized, which is common sense, right? Things don't organize themselves by any nature.
I know where you're going.
Yeah,
I think
so
they do as well.
Yeah.
Basically, your argument only makes sense if you have no understanding what evolution is, because it's not random changes.
Afterwards. Sorry.
It's the changes which work. So, from an evolutionary point of view, it will always be an improvement. Just to say things randomly fall to bits is a complete argument because there's nothing random about it. In fact, it's less random than if somebody was deliberately trying to design this, because what works in evolution is what actually does work rather than what somebody thinks might work. It's less random than a plan.
I might have lost you at some point. So I'll say one more thing, and then you say one more thing, and that'll be cool. So, for evolution there's so many things wrong with this idea of how evolution works blindly. I believe evolution is just a mechanism by which God creates. Okay, God doesn't have physical hands, so he's got to create by some mechanism, right? And it's a very intelligent mechanism, a subtle way of doing things. So for one of many problems, logical problems with the idea of random evolution, is for it to realistically work, you would have to have genocide every generation for it to work, because there's a very small probability that the random thing you made, okay, that survives and that's supposed to be better, would be the correct one. If you have random mutations, that's a terrible thing. I mean, I really hope that never happens, because you'll have so many defects in babies. There'll be horrific situations all the time with babies that nobody would ever want to have children. So you'd have genocide every generation. Quite frankly, there won't be generations. You just wouldn't have humanity if that was logically, that kind of evolution was logically applied. I'll let you have the last say.
Yeah, okay. I mean, basically, that is exactly what does happen. We have babies with congenital illnesses, we have babies which are aborted, we have adults which have diseases which kill them before adulthood. So, you know, nobody said evolution was kind. Obviously, it's a cruel system, because those which don't make the grade don't make the grades. So you can't actually reject evolution because it offends moral sensibilities. You can only reject evolution if it doesn't fit the facts, which unfortunately it does. I close my argument.
Thank you so much, Richard. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Thank you.